Welcome back. You're listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Okta on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Karen Regge, the Chief Information Officer for the Director of Defense Trade Controls at the Department of State. Now, Karen, before break, we were talking about internal customers and identity and access management. Let's move external. You said you have something to the effect of 13,000 industry customers, and they range from large customers like Boeing or Lockheed to small companies that maybe are exporting a part or a piece of a part. So how does identity and access management work for them?
Okay, well that's more complicated. So,
it usually is when there's 13,000 compared to 250, but
right.
I'm no expert.
So in our legacy systems, we had a requirement for anyone who was signing an application for a license to export had to have a digital cert. And so what we decided was to keep that requirement as we moved to the cloud. Because a lot of our industry participants were really concerned about identity as much as we were concerned about identity. They wanted to make sure that there was no one that could go in and ask for a license that wasn't someone bona fide from their company. So what we did is we incorporated, we put this requirement out to Okta. When right before the break, I was saying how I had sort of gone down this road and it was complicated, and we decided to go back and see if Okta could handle this. And one of the things that they weren't ready at that time was this digital cert requirement. And so what they did is they modified the software to allow us to continue to use these digital certs. So they had the capability for PIV cards and other types of authentication, but they didn't have it at that point for these digital certs. And so that was, to me, a game changer, because when they decided to do that, I felt like we were going to actually be able to very quickly be able to secure the data. So what the industry participant does is they start by enrolling in Okta. That's the very first step, is to enroll in Okta. And then each industry participant has a self-appointed corporate administrator. And that corporate administrator is responsible for all the roles-based permissions for their company. So they don't come to us to ask for the role. They go to the corporate administrator, and the corporate administrator goes into Okta again and does the role-based permissions there. And then we have another layer, because we have an advisory group called the Defense Trade Advisory Group. And what they said is that there's a requirement that companies and universities want to be able to segregate out certain licenses into certain groups, that only certain people have access to these licenses and other people have access to these licenses. So that might be by department, it might be by subsidiary, it might be departments in a university. And so we built into the application at this point, in the licensing application, the capability for that corporate administrator to go in and separate out licenses, separate out data at the record level, and allow users to be part of those groups, allowing them to have complete control over who sees their data.
So the digital certificates, are we talking about the like PKI certs, or are we talking about something above that, like a hash where your sides and their side are shaking hands to complete the certificate?
The digital cert that we used for our legacy system was an ACES cert. It was sold by IdenTrust, and it was of the credential for a FISMA moderate.
Okay.
And so we're doing more products now. We're allowing for other vendors to come in, and we have 3 different vendors: DigiCert, IdenTrust, one other that I can't remember. But all the products have to be at the FISMA moderate level. And so the industry, each user that is going to sign a license has to get one of these digital certs. And that requires, that's not digital. That requires a notary, a whole bunch of forms being filled out, a FedEx envelope. It's not ideal, but it's the first step for us to make sure that we have the identity. And in the future, we're actually looking toward more digital solutions that will provide the same surety that we are grasping the identity of the person that is actually signing these licenses.
It's why we all still depend on passwords and usernames in our personal life, because getting that digital cert is just too difficult. We see a lot of movement in like stuff like derived credentials, right?
Correct.
And
yes.
We see a lot of movement. There was a push, I remember years ago, for SAML, the SAML 2, and
Right.
I'm not sure what they're up to now. Are those the type of things you guys are looking at in the future?
Well, I mean, from the external perspective, we're looking for Okta to partner with folks that can do that identity proofing, and then it would be a digital experience. And I think that's where Okta is moving, and so I'm very interested in their roadmap with respect to that, because that's a huge piece of our requirements for our external users. And then we have an additional problem, which is that some of the riskiest of movements of these exports can happen when it's already out of the country. So what that's called is a retransfer of a munition. And so in that instance, there's no good identity proofing. I mean, digital certs are not for every country in the land, right? And so those folks have to request, and we have no good way of identity proofing them. And so that's another piece that we are really looking for solutions, is how to identity proof people outside of the country.
If I bring up the word blockchain, you wouldn't get mad, would you?
Not at all.
I mean, that seems like they obviously, right?
Yes.
Or distributed
Yes.
ledger, as it's
Right.
better called now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
all right, maybe it's something to talk about later in the program. One of the other things that came to mind as you kind of went through the process is this idea of they get the digital cert, but then they have to come into your system as well.
Right.
And then they have to either sign off on something or approve something, or however the process works. How does it connect? So you have to make sure that those digital certificates that they're getting can shake the hand of your system.
Yes.
And then your system also, does it have to do any sort of security look, any sort of like it's the balance, I guess, of accessibility and security?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a process where we have to get the digital cert credential and have it on our system. And then from there, it's very easy for people to actually use that digital cert through Okta to obtain authorization to get into the system. But before that, the corporate administrator has to give that user permissions to do that signing. And that signature role is called the empowered official. And so there is a process associated with that. And a lot of the work, I like to say that in terms of each individual defense company or whatever university or company that we're dealing with, that they are in the best position to determine who can see what and how they should see it and what role they should play. And so a lot of the complexity of the user management for the external users, we've pushed back out into the out to the industry.
From your perspective as the CIO, if you're kind of pushing back a lot of the oversight, if you will, of the actual cert and the ability to read and look and make decisions, what does that mean for your systems though internally? Because all that data, all that is internal to you. Do you have are you depending on people like Okta and your digital cert providers to meet a certain level, and it's kind of you audit them and you look at them and decide if they're meeting the requirements that you've laid out? Walk me through a little bit about.
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to answer this question is that because the data is so sensitive, industry can only see what industry puts in.
What's their
right?
data.
Theirs, right? And so the systems have to be built in such a way that no one could see somebody else's data. So it's simple from the standpoint that that's why we can put sort of all the responsibility on the company to determine of your data, how does your organization going to work with this data in terms of role-based management?
But what does that mean? I guess let me try to put a finer point on this. What does it mean for you as the CIO of the Defense Trade Controls when you guys are building the system, right? You have to build it in a certain way, or you have to oversee it in a certain way. I guess I'm just trying to kind of go the next level down, because if the onus can't only be on the contractor, right? The onus you have some of the responsibility too, right?
Well, we do, but I see our responsibility as building a system that allows that other side to do what they need to do. Yeah. And so that was not inconsequential in terms of even going down to the record level. I mean, that required us to do the programming to allow for that. But I will say that not having to, from scratch, build the user management role-based piece and the two-factor authentication, it's like, I really feel like it's like we just pushed the easy button.
Yeah. That has always been the hardest piece. I think agencies can buy or build or develop good systems, but getting that role-based. I mean, we've been talking about role-based authentication for years. I mean, I remember writing a story, I don't know, say like 2007, 2008, about the back-end user authentication. There was a pilot with GSA and the old information sharing environment, and it just never could kind of get it past that pilot stage.
Yeah, and I mean, I was at the Federal Communications Commission a long time ago when the auction program, I was in charge of the auction program. And we had the RSA tokens. We were one of the first federal users of RSA tokens, where we'd have to mail out the RSA token. And these were people that were going in to bid. And so, we needed to make sure that the right people had access to make billion-dollar bids.
They fixed that. Now it's an app on your phone.
That's
what
right.
I use.
Exactly.
Karen, let's take a quick break. We get back, we can continue our conversation. We can talk more about the customer expectations and meeting customer experience goals. My guest today is Karen Reggie, the Chief Information Officer for the Director of the Defense Trade Controls at the State Department. I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Okta on Federal News Network.